Tour and Brandon Scott. It is wild, folks, wild. Ann and I are having time slips, but before we get into that, Linda Howe has an equally phenomenal report. What a dreamland this is, I have to tell you. From England, she has talked with the world's leading exobiologist about that red rain in Kerala, India a few years ago. He's been studying it, and he could be in the process of discovering the first life form from outer space. So here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. It was nearly half a century ago, in 1960, a mathematics graduate student from Colombo, Sri Lanka, set off on his first international trip to Cambridge, England. His name is Chandra Wickramasinghe. He was fascinated by stars in the night skies, wondered about other life out there, and his Cambridge University advanced degree was in astronomy. His faculty supervisor was the famous Cambridge astronomer Fred Hoyle. The two men had the curiosity and courage to look for other life in the universe by studying cosmic dust. And their controversial panspermia hypothesis was that the universe is teeming with at least microbial life, which can be transported from one cosmic location to another. In their collaboration, the two astronomers felt strongly that the double helix DNA found in all Earth life had been seeded here by comets or other cosmic bodies, and that same DNA would be found in all life forms throughout the cosmos. Now there is a discovery in rainwater that fell on the southwestern tip of India in the state of Kerala, which might challenge the idea that all DNA in this universe is the same. 5 years ago, in July 2001, Kerala residents said they heard a loud boom, then red rain fell, which stained their white clothes. News of the red rain mystery reached Dr. Godfrey Lewis, a physicist at Mahatma Gandhi University in Kerala. He collected many test tubes full of the red-colored rainwater and put some of the odd liquid under a microscope. He was stunned by the beautiful rust color of what seemed to be living cells. The cell diameters averaged 10 microns, a little bigger than a human blood cell, which is about 7 microns. Dr. Lewis reported as many as 15 daughter cells budded within one mother cell and then broke out of the adult cell. That was clearly a process of replication. In normal Earth biology, replication requires the presence of DNA. But Dr. Lewis could not find evidence of DNA in the multiplying cells in his test tubes. 8 months ago, in January of 2006, Dr. Lewis contacted astrobiologist Chandra Wickramasinghe, now at Cardiff University in Wales. Soon, Professor Wickramasinghe had some vials of the red rainwater to study and sent some to biologists at Sheffield University in England. America's Cornell University also received some red rain samples to analyze isotopic ratios. Elements confirmed so far are hydrogen, silicon, oxygen, carbon, and aluminum. But there still is no definitive confirmation of DNA or what makes the cell walls red. This month, on August 7th to 8th, I was in the microbiology lab at Cardiff University to see the red rainwater for myself and to talk with Professor Wickramasinghe and his graduate student, Nori Miyake. Nori has tried to break open the cells to amplify whatever DNA might be there. Nori showed me the pale pink rainwater in test tubes, and you can see photographs at my news website, www.earthfiles.com. At the top of the headlines page is a hot link to this red rain report with photographs and microscopic images. Nori told me he has never seen such thick, hard cell walls, which he could only partially penetrate. He is concerned about contamination in the fluorescent techniques that he tried, which indicate there might be DNA, but in his fluorescent research, there have been variables which might be false positives. He does not even know if he ever extracted anything from the red cells, because the walls were so thick and hard to break. The Cardiff lab director, David Lloyd, told me he thinks the rainwater cells might be some kind of earth yeast cell, which also replicate by internal budding. And he postulates that maybe some kind of yeast rose up into the clouds over Kerala, multiplied into literally tons of cells, which then came down in the multiple rains. But Dr. Lloyd cannot explain why there would be red rain only in the summer of 2001, and none reported before or after until July 2006. There was another red rainfall in July this year over Kerala, almost exactly 5 years to the day of the first red rain. In June, when I interviewed Professor Wickramasinghe for Earth Files in Dreamland, he was reluctant to give up on the red rain cells having recognizable Earth DNA. But by August 8th, his mind was opening to the possibility that his and Fred Hoyle's panspermia theory might now have to accommodate other life in the universe that might not be exactly like Earth.
Subscribers, I have a few things to tell you. First, The Grays comes out on August the 22nd. Your book plate, if you were a subscriber, an active subscriber as of August the 15th, is in the mail and should be coming within the next couple of weeks. Ann and I are both going to be on George Noory on August the 24th. I think you'll find that fascinating. You'll also find Ann's diary, which is up right now in the regular part of the unknowncountry.com website under Ann's diary. Just take a look at it. You'll find it quite fascinating. I think I certainly did. It's the first time she's ever really talked about some of the things that actually happened to her during the time we were interacting with the Grays. Chapter 3 of the Grays should be available soon for you to download from the subscriber section. The first 3 chapters will be available and remain available in the subscriber section. I will not be reading past, however, Chapter 3. Also, tomorrow, Saturday the 19th, from 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific time, I will be in the chat room live in the subscriber section, so you're welcome to come visit with me there, and I'll be there from time to time from now on. We're not using our chat room enough, and I want to get back to it. It was a lot of fun, and it's something we should continue to do. Now let's rejoin Dreamland and Dr. Lowell's interview.
On the basis of the evidence that I've seen, I have to come on this side of an extraterrestrial origin for the red cells. I think the first injection of these cells in 2001 or even earlier than that most likely came from space.
And is it fair to say, if I summarize, that on the one hand, we have the sound of the boom that might relate to incoming chunk of ice that could have been carrying something that resembles yeast cells, but it came from outer space and replicated in the upper clouds, or it was a red yeast from our Earth that rose up in the air for some reason and replicated in the clouds. But those are the two, one terrestrial and one non-terrestrial?
I think those are the two contending theories, that the sonic boom that was heard was a source of the red rain cells, that a small piece of a comet exploded and brought the material, either the whole of the material that went into the red rain, or of a minute fraction that was then multiplied in the clouds. Alternatively, that the red rain was something that was just lofted up from the surface of the earth, maybe from the trees and in the winds and so on. I personally find that almost incredible, that these are earth organisms that could have been lifted in such great quantities into the clouds. They don't look like earth organisms in the details that are available at the moment. There are some generic similarities to yeast cells, but that doesn't exclude a yeast cell coming from outside, maybe yeast-type cell with a totally different DNA, or maybe no DNA, as we still have to determine that. There is a continuing puzzle, but between the two alternatives, an Earth-based origin and an origin from space, I would err on the side of an origin from space.
Could you explain also, there's been a recent rain?
Yeah, this was something that was quite surprising. I found the news on an internet site. I got hold of Godfrey Lewis and friends in Kerala, and they confirmed that there was such an episode almost 5 years to the day after the events of 2001.
So this would have been in July of 2006?
July 2006. Now, how does one explain that? I think it's very difficult to explain that in terms of an earthbound cycle, some replication cycle of yeast perhaps on the ground, 5-year replication cycle. That doesn't make too much sense. On the other hand, comets have periods that vary from 3 years to very long periods. Halley's comet has over 80-year periods and so on. So there's a whole range of periods associated with comets. And one could easily imagine a stream of cometary particles with a period of precisely 5 years and the Earth crossing this stream on a regular basis. Why that stream crossed over and entered the Earth's atmosphere at Kerala might remain a problem, but I think there are ways of explaining that as well.
Why Kerala, the southwest corner of India, and not other places on our Earth?
I think other places on the Earth also would have been receiving these red rain cells. It wouldn't have been noticed, I think. The other places around Kerala, if you think of a belt of latitude that goes around the Earth, where Kerala is, then east of Kerala is the Indian Ocean all the way to Sahara, and west you have the mountains. And so if this red rain fell over a huge strip of land going maybe half the way around the world, Kerala would have been the only place with the population able to detect it. But why the latitude of Kerala? That may be the problem. The Earth's latitude at Kerala seems to be implicated in some way, and that may be connected with the way that this comet stream intersects the Earth.
And that latitude of Kerala is what?
I would think about 10 degrees north of the equator.
But to date, there still is even a mystery about why there would be repetitive red rains in Kerala, India.
There is a mystery of almost unparalleled proportions in terms of any terrestrial biological cycle. If you can think of any earthbound cycle that has a 5-year period in yeast cells, that's very difficult to come up with. So I think that is, to me, a clear indication that it's been driven from outside. But on the existence or otherwise of DNA, there still remains a considerable uncertainty. I would like to think that wherever the cells came from, whether they were from the Earth or from space, that they had DNA. Simply because that's the kind of life that I'm used to thinking of, that all of life on Earth is based on DNA. So it would be a great surprise if there were biological cells that did not contain DNA. But the arguments of Godfrey Lewis, I think, are also quite important to explore. And to this day, we haven't had definitive evidence of DNA from the tests that were done by Nori. There were fluorescence tests that were used, very standard tests that have been used, and they do show positive for DNA, but it's well known that these could be false positives. There's no really 100% detection of DNA based on fluorescence. The really crucial test would be to break open the cells and to extract DNA and then to try to amplify the DNA and see whether there is DNA and the DNA is similar to such and such cell type that we recognize. Now, there are two things to say about this. The breaking of the cells turned out to be exceedingly difficult. The cell walls were robust, almost beyond belief. Really a mammoth task to extract DNA from the cells, which we think we have done. Nori is the person who was working in the lab, and he was able to break the cells open and extract some DNA, but so far we've not been able to amplify that DNA and to make sure that the DNA is something that came from the cells. It's very easy to have contaminants in the process of breaking the cells and extracting what is inside them.
I thought that Nori had said that he was not happy with what he had been able to do with the cell walls so far, that he didn't feel that he had actually been able to penetrate them the way he wanted to extract material as he normally would with normal cells.
I think that's true. I mean, I looked at some of the pictures, the electron microscope picture and the optical microscope pictures of his broken cells. There was evidence of broken cell walls and fragments of cells and so on. But there was also very little evidence of anything that came out of those cells. And I think that's the bottom line, that we have to identify something that came out of the cells as being the DNA that we amplify, or we try to amplify.
That is actually part of the red rain cell and not some possible contaminant from the problem of penetrating the cell.
Yeah, that's right. The problem of penetrating the cells, as I said, was horrendous, and he had to use various techniques of using ice, for instance, water ice, and then cracking open the water ice. There were techniques that were very prone to introduce contaminants, and this is the uncertainties that we have at the moment.
Is it possible that that thickness of the cell would then have evolved because you need some kind of real serious protection in an outer space environment?
I think that's true. The thickness of the cell wall is a great protection against ultraviolet radiation. And so also is the pigment. The red pigment, whatever the pigment is comprised of, also could be a protection against ultraviolet light. And I think all the indications to me are that these cells can withstand very harsh conditions, can withstand the conditions of entry, high-speed entry into an Earth's atmosphere, and also could survive high doses of ultraviolet radiation. We'd like to do experiments to verify this, to subject the cells to high doses of UV and see what happens to them. These experiments haven't been done yet. We're planning them in the near future.
Now, the identity of the red pigment, it's been 5 years now since that first red rain. Why do you think that that red pigment, or whatever it is that makes the cells red, has not yet been identified?
The samples were available to us only relatively recently, so we haven't had much time to do all the tests that are possible. I think the tests so far would exclude a heme, iron-based pigment. Carotenoids, which are the other red, yellowish pigments, they seem to be a strong candidate for the red coloration. As they do occur, for instance, in certain yeasts, we know that there are many types of yeast that have reddish pigments, and these are carotenoids, not anything like hemoglobin or related to hemoglobin.
Now, in the yeast that we know, what purpose does the red pigment serve?
I think the yeasts, again, present in the atmosphere, they're blown around in the Earth's atmosphere. Some yeasts have also been discovered high in the sky, in the clouds, for example. And if they are to survive conditions in the upper atmosphere, then a pigment would be of great importance to screen the DNA from ultraviolet radiation.
Oh, you mean that the red pigment could serve as some kind of a filtering mechanism?
Yeah, the red pigment would serve as a filter mechanism. It is known, I think, in the case of many pigmented bacteria and pigmented microorganisms generally, that the red pigments serve precisely this purpose.
And it would be filtering UV. And one speculation was that perhaps the red pigment might provide the energy for the cell if you cannot find DNA.
I think so. It could be a light harvesting device as well. A pigment takes up a color, appears red or yellow or something, because it responds to sunlight in a certain way. It absorbs particular colors in sunlight. The radiation that is so absorbed could also be light harvesting, could produce energy, could be energy source for the cell.
And if we are dealing with extraterrestrial cells from someplace else that came into the Earth's atmosphere above Kerala in some kind of cometary ice, and if it turns out that you and Sheffield and Cornell cannot confirm definitely DNA, what are the implications in your thinking for a life form that looks like a yeast cell but does not have DNA?
I suppose I've got to rethink my entire sort of framework of scientific orthodox beliefs that DNA is crucial to life. That may not be true anymore. I mean, if this is proved to be a biological entity that replicates without DNA, then one has to look for another system, a non-DNA system that can hold information. Because what DNA does, it holds the information that is needed to reproduce. I just can't think of any other mechanism, any other chemical system at the moment, but that doesn't mean that there isn't such a system. It could be that an alien life that evolved a system that is not based on DNA. There's been speculations of silicon-based life and so on. But in this particular instance, the cells that we're seeing are just carbon-rich, and they have all the normal carbon, nitrogen, oxygen abundances. So it's not an alien life. It's not a silicon-based life or totally alien chemistry that's involved. So it would surprise me if there is absolutely no DNA. But on the other hand, I think it's also an indication that we just don't know anything about biology that might exist on a bigger scale outside of the Earth. I think we have to keep an open mind as to what types of biology exist on a cosmic scale.
Could the red pigment itself be some kind of an information carrier device if there is no DNA?
Not really, because I think the molecules that are pigmented usually are carotenoids and so on. They're not long chains of information-carrying systems. So I think that's probably unlikely.
And what is your guess on the red rain of Kerala in terms of being able to prove that it came in from outer space on a comet?
That is a very difficult issue to resolve with absolute certainty. If there was no DNA, then that would be an indication that is almost compelling in the direction of an alien incursion. If there was DNA, then one has to analyze the DNA and make sure that the DNA is totally disjoint from any living form, any known type of yeast that exists on the Earth. And then one might have some ambiguities, but then I think that would also be an indicator of an alien invasion. That would be the nearest one would get to complete proof. And I tend to think that sooner or later, something like the red rain would happen, which would be the smoking gun for panspermia, which would absolutely decisively demonstrate that we are not alone, that our life here is connected to a much bigger life system in the cosmos.
Dr. Godfrey Lewis, currently in Kerala, India, will be flying to Cardiff in mid-September to join about 30 other astrobiologists and Professor Wickramasinghe at Cardiff University, a kind of symposium in which these astrobiologists will put their heads together to look at what the data is so far on these mysterious red rain cells that have fallen now in multiple rains only in Kerala, India, or at least only found in Kerala, India. And they are going to see the data presented by Professor Lewis, who says that when he applies high temperature and high pressure, up to 300 to 350 degrees Celsius, which is about 600 degrees Fahrenheit, that he sees acceleration in the replication of these cells in the test tubes. So far, Cornell, Sheffield, and Cardiff have not duplicated that work. But Professor Godfrey Lewis is going to present his data, which he thinks further supports the fact that these are cells that somehow have evolved to survive in high temperatures and high pressures that might exist somewhere else in the universe.
Wow, what an awesome report. We'll be right back with Linda Moulton Howe. This is Whitley Strieber. We're talking with Linda Moulton Howe, who has just come back from England. And Linda, that was quite frankly an awesome report. It could be the first report of an alien life form. Now, what do you make of the fact that the red rain has returned?
Oh, it is one of the most surprising developments. It shocked Professor Rick Wickramasinghe, and it shocked me when I heard. But when he said that this might reinforce the idea that the Earth is going through the tail of some kind of cometary material on a 5-year cycle now that either the comet hasn't been identified, it may be a phenomenon that was going on before even 2001, but for some reason, that particular summer, the white clothes of people were stained by this rain. Maybe it had fallen, as he said, in a previous 5 years. Maybe it had fallen further in some direction, but that 5 years ago, this material came down where there was a population. And now, the fact that 5 years, almost exactly to the day, I believe it was only 1 day off of July 2001 to 2005, that the exact same thing happened, you can see from an astronomer's point of view that that suggests a cycle. And the one thing that we do know, that cycles in our solar system can be comets on a 3-year period, 5-year period, and so forth. And it doesn't prove that it is a comet. It does not, and he's the first to admit it. But the scientists have to start with theory somewhere. And when we've got now at least data points of 2001, multiple rains for 2.5 months, and now 2006, July, at least one rain. So far, he has not had reports of other rains, which would be different from 2001. But just like we go through with the Perseid and the Leonid and the other meteor showers, sometimes they are great, and sometimes they are hardly anything.
Well, it's just a tremendously exciting report, Linda. Thank you so much. And, folks, we're going to be taking a little break again, and next up, we're going to have Brandon Scott, Starfire Tour, and Whitley and Ann Strieber talking about some things that are just absolutely off the wall. I mean, we may be living in a matrix, as Ann and I have found out in our own personal lives. It is weird. Stay tuned. We're back today with Starfire Tour and Brandon Scott because things are unfolding in this weird world of time slips in our own lives, in the lives of Whitley and Ann Strieber and Starfire Tour and Brandon Scott, as lived together as friends and also separately. And we're going to be discussing the whole nature of this time slip issue and what it may mean to us. I'd like to welcome both Starfire Tour and Brandon Scott to Dreamland. Starfire has a list which you can join. Brandon is a magician, a man of many talents, an actor, probably many other things that I don't even know about. And I would like Starfire first, if you could, to tell us about your list and how to get to it.
Thank you. It's called the Interdimension List. It's at Yahoo Groups, and it's a chat and research list on my discovery and research into time shifts, time travel, timeline anomalies, the paranormal, even UFOs. Anything and everything unusual.
Okay, and so you get to that by going to Yahoo Groups, which is pretty simple to do, and then going to Interdimension.
That is correct.
That's correct. And Brandon, where are you best reached?
Hi. Best way to reach me is my website is my name, brandonscott.tv.
So brandonscott.tv will keep us up with your doings. And I have to tell you, by the way, and this is one of the things that makes all of this, for me, a little more delightful. Brandon is an excellent magician. I mean, I have seen him perform, and it's wonderful. And some of this stuff happened at the Magic Townhouse, which is, or the Magic Castle, in West Hollywood. I guess it's in Hollywood, in California, which is a place where magicians by the zillions hang out. There are magic acts going on there all the time during the evenings. And in addition to that, it's full of secret passages. So there we were in the middle of all of this. And Ann Strieber is also with us. And
I'm here.
Yes, Ann is here.
I'm the one who had the incredible experience in the ladies' room at the Magic Castle with Starfire Tour.
Yeah, this is, and we'll get into this in just a minute. This is all so bizarre and strange for me because I have had, as you know, folks, some very extraordinary experiences in movement through time myself. And Ann and I had one together a few days ago, which is one of the reasons we're doing this program, because it just was so very, very unusual. Now, before we get into the specifics, though, I think it would be worth listening to Starfire tell us how you got into this, and then we'll get into with both of you what you think may be going on, because one thing that will happen, Magic Castle or no Magic Castle, there is something very real happening here. We've documented these experiences quite carefully, and one of them especially has a resonance involving the Bible code and the recent failed prophecy of apocalypse that occurred on August the 3rd that's hair-raisingly bizarre. So do stay tuned. Now, Starfire, where do you kind of come from? And your real name can't even be Starfire Tor, and if you want to divulge it, we'd be fascinated.
Well, my birth name is Astrid Tor, so Astrid Starfire is a nickname of Astrid, and I'm adopted, and I have a mundane adopted name too, but I mostly don't use it. Sometimes I write under both names, but mostly it's Starfire Tor these days.
So,
the past couple of decades.
Somewhere back in there's a Gail Jones, but we'll stick with Starfire Tor. Understood.
Right. It's not a secret. It's just I prefer one over the other.
You like Kramer.
Exactly. I hope I don't enter rooms that way.
No.
Anyway, I started off just very much the way anyone else would, discovering about time shifts and timeline anomalies. I experienced them. Just like you did with the newspaper, which you'll be talking about, or what happened to Anne and I at the Magic Castle ladies' restroom. Which
riveted me, folks. I mean, we're living in the Matrix. It's real. It's got to be. So
right.
Go ahead.
So, I think the very first one that I experienced was years ago. I had a disposal in my kitchen, and you used to flick it on, and the disposal went on. You flick it off, and the disposal goes off. And one day I went in, and the polarity had reversed. You flick it on, it goes off. You flick it down, it goes on. And then I noticed things in my home were changing. I had a bureau, and it had these brass handles. And one day I woke up, and the brass handles were now gray, and behind it was plastic. And these things were happening again and again and again, and I just wouldn't let it go. I wanted to know what it was, and that began my journey.
This is the difference between you and the rest of us. You wouldn't let it go. I mean, these are things we all, and folks, if you look at your life, you will find it's full of them that you put aside, but there's something else there, and that is one of the things I'm finding is that my mind is literally programmed to filter this out. Like I will see in the papers from time to time, and I just saw one the other day, and of course, Natch, I can't remember who it was. An actor was mentioned who I thought was dead. And I was stunned to see his name there, but then right. I thought, well, he must not be dead, I must be wrong. But what I'm beginning to think is, I'm not wrong. I'm just somewhere else. How do you react to that?
Well, that is a phenomenon of time shifts that I call the time shift living dead. That's because we don't just live in one timeline. We have multiple coexisting timelines, and we are moved around from timeline to timeline as of our consciousness and awareness. We actually exist in all of the timelines, but we only have an awareness and consciousness in one dominant one. As events are changed through time shifts and the timeline is edited, we suddenly find ourselves in a slightly altered timeline. So in one timeline, someone can be alive, and another timeline, someone can be dead, simply because that's the way history panned out. And that's how the time shift living dead happens. It tells you that a time shift has occurred. So if you know that someone died, and now you're seeing that they're alive, that's a pretty big marker that our timeline has been edited. And your brain was programmed to accept the change and not notice anything, except, as you've noticed, there are glitches. And those glitches allow us to see the flaw in the program, and that's how I travel down the road to discover that not only that time shifts are real, that they even exist. Whitley, Ann, it's the biggest secret in the world.
It is, Starfire, and I wanted to say I recently asked Fred Alan Wolf, who is a quantum physicist, and these guys...
I admire him very much.
Oh, yeah, these guys are the top guys in the science community. Okay, I said to him, I was interviewing him for subscribers, and I said to him, I have a theory. I think that mediums, and I have met a lot of mediums lately, just by happenstance or karma or whatever, and these are people, as you probably know, who contact the dead. And I said, I think what these people are doing is they are going into a parallel universe where the people they are contacting have not died. And I thought he was going to say, well, that's a bunch of, And he said, I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. And I think that is what's happening. I suspect that consciousness can literally expand once we know this is happening, that not only are we living in this timeline, we're living in many timelines, that consciousness can expand so that we don't filter out what's happening in the other timelines. And we'll discuss why that would matter so much in a minute. But before we do that, Brandon, I have seen you perform. I want to bring up a man I knew years ago. Ann and I both knew, and Ann will, as I'm talking, she's going to lean in and corroborate this. We saw this man, Joseph Stein, disappear before our eyes.
And he was a big guy, too. He was not the kind of guy you would think could ever disappear.
No, he wasn't near any trees, anything. He simply disappeared, and so did his wife. That's correct.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we saw this. I saw him, not with Ann, but with 7 or 8 other people do this alone. He was walking down a path toward us, and he just disappeared before all of our eyes, and we were standing there agog, and he proceeds to walk up behind us. He was in the Gurdjieff Foundation, and he goes, "Ha, ha, what are you, a bunch of sleeping fools?" And I asked him later how he did this, and he just glared at me. He was a rough, gruff guy, and he said, "What's the matter with you asking a question like that? Figure it out." Brandon, you're a magician. You figure it out.
How'd he do it?
Well, I would have to actually see the conditions under which this was done to determine whether there was a technique used, other than the possibility that does exist, that this gentleman had an ability to do something as far as from the utilizing of illusion techniques. I would actually have to be familiar with the location. Could there be ways of something like this done? Well, if you say it was totally open, there was no structures whatsoever anywhere.
In neither case.
And it was daylight?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was no trees, there was no anything like that. I would actually, to give you an accurate answer, as I said, we have to look at the territory.
Okay. But let's assume that the territory was as we described it, that there was, and you understand, in both cases, I went and investigated carefully to see where he had gone.
The same way Starfire did with the ladies' room at the Magic Castle.
Right. And now, let me ask you this. As a magician, are there any tricks that seem to you to perhaps, without even maybe the magician realizing it, to actually utilize movement between parallel universes or dimensions to make them work? Or have you sensed that ever?
Okay, not in what we call stage magic.
But you have in your real life, Brandon.
Yes, exactly. I'm just being very, very sensitive in sharing with you the difference between stage prestidigitation illusion and then the alchemy of being able to understand nature and phenomena and that kind of magic. Two different things.
We're going to be back in just a moment, and you'll never guess who's going to show up. Bigfoot. We'll be right back. This is Whitley
and Ann
Strieber, and we are doing Dreamland together today with Brandon Scott and Starfire Tour, exploring parallel dimensions, time slips, and all manner of things along these lines.
And magic, real magic.
Real magic, right. As well as comparing it, because Brandon is a master magician, a prestidigitator, an illusionist, to stage magic and the abilities and skills of a stage magician as applied to these bizarre experiences. So, why are we doing this? Well, one of the reasons is it's tremendously empowering, because once you realize, as Ann and I did when we just met Starfire and Brandon, I think Brandon just sent me an email and I found it fascinating, and we got kind of going that way, or we were introduced in any case. When I first heard about this from Starfire, my reaction was, ho hum. Another weird thing in a life so full of weird things that I could fill 2 filing cabinets. And then it kind of grew, and we noticed one night we were walking home from somewhere, and we didn't cross one of the streets that we usually cross, and yet we got home anyway. A little thing, and then other things happened. Now some big stuff has happened. I want to go into another area just briefly. I want to segue into cryptozoology, which I'm sure both of you guys are familiar with. And I want to postulate something. There have been many situations. I'll give you a good situation from the opening of Colm Kelleher's terrific book, Skinwalker, about the NIDS Ranch, the National Institute for Discovery Sciences ranch in Utah, which Bob Bigelow, who was the head of the institute, bought because it was so anomalous. All kinds of weird stuff was happening there. The family who lived there had just moved in there when a dire wolf, that is a wolf that his head comes up to a man's chest from the Pleistocene, came up to them, came running across a field, came up to them, and was friendly, but then proceeded to jump into a corral and try to eat a calf. They emptied a shotgun and a rifle into this animal with no or little effect. It eventually ran away, and they tracked it through a swampy area. They determined that the animal weighed about 300 pounds because they could see the tracks. The tracks abruptly stopped. Now, I think that animal went into a world a dimension where the Pleistocene has never ended, or hasn't ended yet, where there are still dire wolves floating around. And I think that since the animal was perfectly capable of grabbing and injuring this calf, these people are probably lucky to be alive. Now, they also got hairs from the animal. The hairs were DNA tested. No matches. No matches. Folks, guys, have you ever felt like you could move into another world? Or are you closer to it now than you used to be? Brandon, why don't you lead off?
Actually, the possibility of going from one timeline to another, this is really an area where Starfire has done a lot of the research.
Oh, I know that. That's why I asked you to lead off, because I knew it was going to be short. Right.
I have both seen this and I have experienced it myself. I have not always been able to explain it. When I'm invited to do research with someone like Starfire invites me, I try to determine unintentional misidentifications of physical phenomena, or as well as intentional physical fraud that might be perpetrated by a claimant. And a lot of times I can't really explain what happens to me. I mean, many situations by myself and also with Starfire where we were in one place and bang, suddenly we're in another, where things appear and disappear. There was a recent event at a vortex where a little boy appeared clinging to my leg. And it was written on that report was written up, and we actually have been still investigating that, and I believe that what happened at the Magic Castle could even be connected to that. Connected to it as an ongoing... Starfire, are you there?
Oh, I'm listening to every word.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
it did happen.
Starfire kind of like is the authority on the core matrix and timeline anomalies. So for an explanation as to how that wolf could have walked through in and out of a different timeline, I would actually turn to her.
Well, I guess that's my cue then.
Sounds like it, Starfire. And by
right.
the way, folks, we're going to continue on in the subscriber section because Dreamland is only 48 minutes long, and we've got more to talk about than that. But we'll get to everything that I have said we would get to today in Dreamland. Let's go.
Well, Whitley, you are absolutely right that it is not only possible for animals and places to move from coexisting timeline to coexisting timeline, but there have been documented stories of people who have suddenly walked into another timeline. They see Civil War soldiers, or they come across a house that they later learn is actually burned down, so how could they possibly have been in it or seen it? This is well documented, and this is part of the timeline anomaly conflict. So having a Pleistocene wolf come through, it's not that the wolf had any powers to move through, it's that something happened. And there are these portals and doorways and vortexes, and that's what makes life very interesting. So, yes, I believe it's extremely possible and probable that beings from other timelines can absolutely bleed through and then, hopefully, return back.
Unless they don't necessarily return back. And this gets back to the experience you guys had in that mall that Brandon was just referring to. The little boy. Tell us a little bit, either one of you wants to speak up, about the little boy and the woman he was with and the whole sort of experience there.
Right. Well, I think I'll just riff that one out. Brandon and I were in this part of the vortex because we were doing some of my research. We were on one of the escalators going up. It's very narrow. Two people can stand side by side. There was no one above us, no one below us, and no one on the escalator going down beside us. And while we're just a little bit halfway up the escalator, a little boy materializes, seemingly out of thin air, clinging to Brandon's left leg. And I say, Brandon, a little boy just appeared, and Brandon can't really feel it. And he turns around and he sees the little boy. Now, we've gone back and we've investigated this thoroughly as we did the Magic Castle timeline anomaly event. These escalators have glass sides, so there was no place for the boy to hide. Brandon did all the research, and then we called security. I was very concerned. Did we have a boy from another timeline? Did he just materialize and pop over from some other part of the complex?
You had a little kid in a shopping mall.
We had a 3-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Right. We had a 3-year-old boy, and I was very concerned that we had a boy that had somehow traveled through time and now was stranded with us. So
how
we
was
made
he
every
dressed? Was he dressed?
What?
Was he dressed in modern clothes?
He was dressed in regular pants and a red pullover sports shirt. He could have been anywhere from the 1950s up to modern day. He was not dressed in baggy pants or anything modern day hip hop or anything of that nature. It was very standard, very well groomed. Hair was shortly cropped and dark. You really couldn't tell his heritage origins. He spoke English perfectly, and he was very ultra intelligent and articulate.
He was amazingly articulate.
He sounds like a kid from about 50 years ago, frankly.
We really don't know. Then, just to shorten the story, we called the security. Brandon and I did some research, and the boy took us and the security guard, I don't know, about half a football field's length away from where he had appeared, and he pointed to a store indicating that that's where his mother was. We looked, there was nobody there, and then poof, the mother just appears. Just appears. And the little boy and she have this reunion, and they're very blasé, like nothing is wrong, nothing has happened. I walk up to her. I just want to make sure this thing is real and not some sort of a hologram. And I tap her on her shoulder, and I say, excuse me, but, do you realize that your little boy was alone in this large place, the things that could happen? She looked up at me like with this blank stare. And I could hear her talking English to the son. It was very strange. It was surreal.
Again, that was like about 50 years ago, because nowadays parents are terrified of kidnapping from some of the things that have happened, and they're usually frantic if they can't find their kids. Again, that's like half a century ago.
Well, hi. Yeah, I was going to add that there's a lot of surrounding things going on here, including some witnesses thinking that the kid was with me, seeing the kid also just kind of appear, and other things that were shifting from the time we arrived at this vortex and afterwards, that it's a connected thing. Starfire, whenever you're with Starfire, you tend to have these experiences, and so many connected experiences as well that, gosh, it would fill books.
Okay, we got to come back in just a second. We're going to move on into the Magic Castle experience and the newspaper experience, and then in the subscriber section, we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty and find out from Starfire just why it is that people who are around her have this happen, as Ann and I have personally and irrefutably experienced. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's
and
Dreamland.
Ann Strieber, too.
Right, it's Dreamland, and we're doing it together today along with Starfire Tour and Brandon Scott. Now we're going to go, the four of us, back to a lovely evening at the Magic Castle. We have had, Brandon has shown us some wonderful close-up card magic, no question about it. It was prestidigitation, and it looked interdimensional because he's good. Now, however, something happened. Annie, why don't you begin the story?
Well, Starfire and I wanted to make sure that we were running on empty for Brandon's show, so we go to the ladies' room. And we go in the ladies' room, and there are 2 stalls in it, and both are empty. Guys, you may not know this, but ladies always make sure the stalls are empty before they go in.
And it's small.
And it's small. It's a small room.
Small room. Yeah.
And there's one door. We both go in the same door. I go out first, and I call out to Starfire. I said, I'll be waiting out front. So I'm standing in the doorway, right in front of the closed door, waiting for Starfire to come out. And a woman comes rushing past me. Now, I didn't see her go in, but she came past me on the way out. And as soon as Starfire came out, I told her about this. The woman was wearing a very distinctive skirt, which I then described to Whitley, who was standing nearby. And Starfire said, let's investigate this further.
Now, my witness is this. I was standing up a set of 3 or 4 stairs, actually looking down at the bathroom when Anne came out. I didn't see a soul come out behind her at all, ever. I never saw this person until after Anne and Starfire had described the way she looked, until afterwards. Okay, now Starfire, why don't you tell what you experienced?
Everything that Anne said. She left the ladies' room before I did, maybe a minute or so. I called back to her, said I was just moments behind her.
And Anne left the ladies' room, you mean?
That is
That's
correct.
Right, yeah.
And when Anne left the ladies' room, I was the only person left in there. We went in. There was only the 2 of us. It was empty except for us. There were only 2 stalls, very small space, and 2 small sinks. Not even room for a chair in there. So when I came out of my stall, all I had to do was turn left to wash my hands at the sink. And maybe a few feet in front of me was the one and only door in and out. But as I come out of the stall and I turn left to the sinks, suddenly there's this woman and we almost collide. Now, I'm thinking, what a klutz I am. Because, my brain is not thinking, where did she come from? My brain isn't going there. I'm just thinking, got to get my hands washed, got to get to Brandon's show.
Now, bear in mind that I was also watching the door before Anne came out. I never saw this woman go in, not before Anne came out, not after Anne came out. So,
right.
Okay.
Now, that is very important because most of these anomalies happen when you're not expecting them. So the observations that people make are very, very important because you never know when something's going to become an event and you've got the evidence.
A good lesson, and in this case, total coincidence that I just happened to be standing there and watching, because if you went to the Magic Castle, you'd see why I was kind of waiting there, because I'm being an old-fashioned guy. I don't want to hang out right next to a ladies' room. On the one hand, although I did screw up my courage after this happened, and I went into the ladies' room and looked at it, and it is exactly as they described. And we'll talk in a minute about whether or not there are any secret doors in there, because that's been looked at, too.
Right.
Now,
go ahead. I'm sorry, Whitley. Pardon me.
Please.
So when I opened the door to go out, that's when Anne came right up to me. She was very excited, saying, a lady came out and she didn't go in. I went, could you repeat that? And she did, and I immediately understood what she was saying. But what I was very impressed about was how intellectually Anne was looking at the entire event. She wasn't trying to theorize or fantasize or make anything more of it. She knew that something unusual had occurred, but she was willing to see it through just in case it was something normal. Or, as you said, one of those tricky little hidden doors at the Magic Castle where the woman came through. That's why she was never seen going through the front door, and she just exited. But as it turns out.
At this point, Anne then came up to me and told me essentially what had happened. I then said, well, I didn't see her. Anne said, well, I will describe her skirt. And Anne described her skirt to me, which was very unique.
Yeah, it was kind of a lace pattern, and I couldn't remember if it was lace or a printed skirt that looked like lace, but I had never seen anything quite like it. And remember, Starfire, then we met up with Scott, and we described it to him. And he knew, with Brandon Scott, and he suspected that he knew who it was.
That's right.
Right.
Brandon, at this point, why don't you tell your part of the story?
Well, I was getting ready for my show, and it was after my show that we went, you share with me what had happened, and I did recognize that I could identify this person, and we found her so that you could interview her, and Starfire could interview her in the way she does, where without front-loading a person, she can find out what experience that person had of that timeline anomaly. And the Magic Castle does have, a lot of magical things going on, and from what I had previously known and then researched thereafter, that particular ladies' room is not trapped with anything. It was actually built after the mansion itself was constructed. It used to just be air, and never really used for anything but a ladies' room. And we did go back and thoroughly examined every inch of it, the walls, make sure there's no trapdoors, no hinges, no panels, any possible way that I needed to be convinced myself.
And you, as a professional magician, you're going to find anything like that because you know how they're made.
Yeah, exactly. And I know what to look for. I know between looking for your illusional, mechanical kind of things. And Starfire and I went back there and spent a considerable amount of time. Actually, I'd never spent that much time in a ladies' room.
And you've never been in that ladies' room,
I've never been in. I've never, in all the years I've worked there, I've never really even been in it. That's right.
It was one of the few rooms in the Magic Castle you actually had never utilized.
I mean, exactly. Even if there was a non, something left from the past that somebody tried to, we were trying to figure out if this lady would have even known that existed, or that had access of using any panels or anything, but they did not exist. What seems to have occurred is that whatever was going on in that person's life, and whatever was going on in the timeline of you, Whitley, Anne, and Starfire collided, and Starfire interviewed her.
Why don't you? Let's go there right now, because we know who she was, and we know her side of the story. So, Starfire, why don't you tell that?
This was very, very important, because I had an immediate feeling that this was actually a person that was at the Magic Castle. This wasn't a time traveler. This wasn't some person flung from some far corner of the earth. I felt that we had a merging of two coexisting timelines, and that we were just off by seconds or even minutes. Okay? In other words, I was going on the hunch that this woman has a memory of entering that ladies' room through that one and only door and exiting the ladies' room through the one and only door. And when I interviewed her, that is exactly what we discovered. That is her memory. She remembered almost colliding with me, and then she left the room. But the interesting thing is, she couldn't remember why she went in there. She just remembers going through, almost colliding with me, and then exiting the room. Why was she in there to begin with? She doesn't know.
I heard her say that, and I because when we knocked on the door, that Brandon thought she was behind, and there she was. I recognized her instantly, right. And you said, "Oh, I just almost bumped into you at the sink a few minutes ago," and she said, "Oh, yes, you did." It was complete proof. It was amazing, and she was wearing that skirt.
That's right.
I witnessed, and so did, I think Brandon did too, witnessed this exchange. So I can attest to the fact that it happened just exactly the way Anne and Starfire described it. And the lady involved has not the faintest idea that anything was wrong, that anything was odd. She's just living her life. Only not all of it in the same dimension or in the same timeline that we were.
That's correct. Actually, the way that it works with these time anomalies is that woman entered and exited the ladies' room in both of the timelines, okay? But Anne and I, the timeline that we were in where we didn't see her enter, well, what happened is it's like a bad movie edit where there's a jump shot. So it looked like the woman never entered the ladies' room to Anne and our awareness, but she had. It was just that when the timelines merged, they did not coordinate time. That's why I call it time shift. Time appears to shift.
Time shift. We're going to take a little break right now. To learn more about Brandon Scott, you can go to brandonscott.tv, and to learn more and get involved in your own work with time slips and your own observations, you can go to Yahoo Groups, and the Starfire's group you can join is Interdimensional. Interdimensional. Okay, when we get back, we're going to be talking about the newspaper incident, and then in the subscriber section, we'll go on into the who's, what's, and whys of all of this. Is there somebody controlling this stuff? We'll find out. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber.
And Ann Strieber.
And we're interviewing Starfire Torah and Brandon Scott together about time slips, because we've had some lately, Ann and I, since meeting Starfire, the person who spreads time slips like the smallpox used to be spread. Or at least spreads awareness of them, I should say. Because what happens, and what I'm hoping will happen with these shows, is that by becoming aware of this possibility, you begin to notice it more in your own life.
Many years ago, we noticed that the UFO experience is somehow catching, and that when you get together a whole bunch of people who have these experiences with people who do not, very often the people who do not start having them. And I have a feeling that time slippages may be the same sort of thing.
Okay, now, it's the morning of August the 3rd. Ann and I are sitting out on our little balcony. We're here in California, and the Mexican political problems having flushed us out, so for the time being. And we're here, and I'm reading the LA Times. And I open the weekend section, and I read about a movie being made by Claude Chabrol, right, based on a Ruth Rendell novel called
13 Steps Down.
13 Steps Down. And I say, great, 13 Steps Down. He's made 13 Steps Down into a movie. This should be fun. Anne is a big Ruth Rendell fan, and I had sort of become one after seeing some British TV movies based on Ruth Rendell's work.
And we both love French films.
Right. And we like Marc Chabrol, so it's perfect.
Claude
Chabrol, yeah. So we put the weekender aside and live the rest of our day. Then the end of the day comes rolling around, and I decide I will look up the weekender again, so we'll go to that movie tonight. I look in the weekender. There is no such movie. There is nothing like that. It is not there. I'm very confused by this, because there's no question. I wouldn't have read it I wouldn't have dreamed it up, not right there, and it was in print. I saw the print with my own eyes. So I go online to try to find out what the heck is going on. It turns out that Ruth Rendell wrote 13 Steps Down last year, published it in 2005. Chabrol does often make her novels into films. He hasn't done this yet. This has not been in the theaters. Whatever weekender I was reading, it wasn't for August the 3rd, 2006. But Starfire, tell us what did get predicted for that date.
Well, while Whitley and I were chatting about this back and forth, on my own list, from out of the blue, one of my list members posts a little PS at the bottom of one of her writings and says, the Bible Code had predicted that August the 3rd, 2006 was supposed to be the day of Armageddon, nuclear this and that, Israel, and I was stunned. And I wrote back to my list. I didn't reveal anything that Whitley had told me, of course, but I said, hey, does anybody know anything more about this? What's the accuracy rate? What's going on here? And then I dug into the research, and I did find that this had been buzzing around the internet, this August the 3rd, 2006. But the thing is, no Armageddon that I can see, but Whitley may have been in a timeline where that movie was made, the blurb that he read, where possibly something horrific did occur.
Now, the night before, I had one of the worst and most vivid nightmares I can remember in a long, long time. It was a nightmare in which the community we are in had been invaded by terrorists, something like 1,000 or so terrorists, a quiet American city, and they were going house to house, just murdering everybody. They'd killed all of the police, and it was going to take days for the military probably to get here, and everyone was going to be killed, and I was desperately trying to phone my son, who lives not in this area, he lives up in San Francisco, but to tell him that this terrible thing was happening, and also to warn him about how to hide. And then I realized that we had to hide, and we couldn't hide. There was no way to hide.
Thank God we're not in this timeline. I mean,
yeah, it was absolutely
like a terrible timeline.
Then fire. There was everything burst into flames at the same time, including our own bodies. And I saw Anne burst into flames. I realized I was on fire, and then I woke up in not fire, but a cold sweat. Then I went back to sleep again after thinking, one thing you can always do well, Strieber, is you are a good nightmare maker. And that was a doozy. So I had a glass of water, went back to sleep. Uneventful until that morning. During the day, I had numerous horrific visions of these sorts of things. And I am wondering if maybe this didn't happen. It did happen. It was true in another timeline. And it happens to be a timeline in which maybe Ruth Rendell published that novel a year or two before, and Claude Chabrol has already made that movie, which it would be very interesting if he does make it in the future.
Right. Now, one of the things that we talked about was wondering if you had somehow sent yourself a trigger across time about this event, and so that you would remember reading the blurb.
Exactly. Maybe it's a communication from me across time saying that this event happened in that timeline, and maybe therefore to warn us in this timeline. Is that something like what you're saying?
That's very, very possible. The one thing that we know for sure is you experienced a timeline anomaly that I call a dual timeline memory conflict. You absolutely not only have this event, but because you read it to Anne, that's a double witness. So you can't even say, I must have not remembered that right. No, it's established. You read something that in the current timeline that we're now dominant in, it doesn't exist. And the fact that you had these nightmares, and then I found this whole thing about this Bible code. Now, we don't know whether that other timeline was about a disaster. We don't know whether the Bible code is true, but to find this coincidence, I don't believe in coincidences. One thing is for sure, you triggered yourself to remember, to remind you that the timeline had changed. Now, possibly you're going to remember a whole lot more. That's the way it works.
That's interesting. I haven't so far. I've been very much wanting to put it in my past, quite frankly, because it's not something I want to think about. It was horrific. Let me ask you guys this, or I guess, again, this is really a question for you, Starfire. What happens to the other timelines? In other words, I'm in this timeline now. If that other timeline is real, I'm dead in that timeline. And where I lived is ruined. Now,
so right now, in this timeline, you're a time shift living dead. If in that other timeline, if that dream was actually a retained memory from a coexisting timeline where you died, then you are technically a time shift living dead in this timeline, not to be alarmed about, because a lot of us that happens to. Now, I want you to think of the core matrix where all the programs for all the coexisting timelines come from. It's something like the hard drive on your computer. And the first time that we talked about this, I explained to you that think of timelines as being copies of scripts. You make a copy, and each copy is an edited version. Now, every single version you keep a copy of on your hard drive. Well, that's the way it is with coexisting timelines. They are always there, but they are saved, and they run in the same space. They're not parallel timelines. They're actually just altered by frequencies. It's a change in frequency. So they're all stacked. There could be hundreds, thousands, millions of them. I can't tell. But every time that there's a change in a timeline, it alters. Only one timeline will become dominant. Now, it's when you retain an awareness, your brain retains an awareness of more than one timeline, that's when you have a dual timeline memory conflict. And that's what happened with your newspaper. That's what happened to you.
Well, I'll tell you, we're very close to the end of Dreamland, and I'll tell you where I want to go with this when we talk in this further in the subscriber section. That is that I think what happened was this to me. I think that whether the Bible code was right or wrong, I don't know. But in that timeline, something catastrophic happened, and we were killed. There's no question in my mind about it. Annie and I died that day. We died then. We died probably right after reading the Chabrol thing, that all hell suddenly broke loose, is my guess.
Okay.
And we chose to go on living. And instead of entering whatever the world of the dead is, we shifted timelines in order to keep living now. I'm going to ask you when we get into the subscriber section, guys, and Annie is too, can we control this? Or is this a decision that we make at the moment of death, or have offered to a chance we have offered to us at the moment of death? I don't know, but I do think that something very profound happened to us on that day. Very profound indeed.
Yes, and I was just going to say the same thing. Did Whitley make the choice to escape? Was that the trigger? The fact that he was able to leave that timeline and go to a safer place? And
Anne, too. And the other question is this. If something is impending in this timeline, if there's some kind of great environmental catastrophe or something, will those of us, and that means you folks, who understand this or know about this, be able to make the journey to another timeline consciously, if we should so choose, or is it all part of nature? Now, I don't like to leave Dreamland with unanswered questions, but this is a big topic, and unfortunately this program is limited in the amount of time that it has. So we're going to continue on in the subscriber section, but I did what I promised. I described everything to you guys. I urge you to keep up with Brandon Scott's website, brandonscott.tv, because it's fun. And if you see him on a performance schedule anywhere, don't miss it. It's quite an act. He's good. He's real good. And Starfire Tour, I urge you to get involved in this because there really is something going on. There's no question in my mind about it. These are small things we've been talking about, but the thing is, they're damned real. They are real. It's as simple as that, real. Therefore, get in her Yahoo group at Interdimensional in Yahoo groups and to sensitize yourself to this stuff, because I think the more sensitive to it you are, the more free you are going to be. Next week on Dreamland, Colm Kelleher is back with us. Ann Strieber has a phenomenal subscriber interview about the relationship between mad cow and Alzheimer's with Colm, who is one of the world's leading experts on this. Do not miss that. It is important. Plus, I talked to him on Dreamland about the Skinwalker Ranch, that amazing NIDS ranch where he personally, this established scientist, had really wild experiences. Next week's Dreamland is going to be very special. Do not. Our tour and Brandon Scott. It is wild, folks, wild. Ann and I are having time slips, but before we get into that, Linda Howe has an equally phenomenal report. What a dreamland this is, I have to tell you. From England, she has talked with the world's leading exobiologist about that red rain in Kerala, India a few years ago. He's been studying it, and he could be in the process of discovering the first life form from outer space. So here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. It was nearly half a century ago, in 1960, a mathematics graduate student from Colombo, Sri Lanka, set off on his first international trip to Cambridge, England. His name is Chandra Wickramasinghe. He was fascinated by stars in the night skies, wondered about other life out there, and his Cambridge University advanced degree was in astronomy. His faculty supervisor was the famous Cambridge astronomer Fred Hoyle. The two men had the curiosity and courage to look for other life in the universe by studying cosmic dust. And their controversial panspermia hypothesis was that the universe is teeming with at least microbial life, which can be transported from one cosmic location to another. In their collaboration, the two astronomers felt strongly that the double helix DNA found in all Earth life have been seeded here by comets or other cosmic bodies, and that same DNA would be found in all life forms throughout the cosmos. Now there is a discovery in rainwater that fell on the southwestern tip of India in the state of Kerala, which might challenge the idea that all DNA in this universe is the same. 5 years ago, in July 2001, Kerala residents said they heard a loud boom, then red rain fell, which stained their white clothes. News of the red rain mystery reached Dr. Godfrey Lewis, a physicist at Mahatma Gandhi University in Kerala. He collected many test tubes full of the red-colored rainwater and put some of the odd liquid under a microscope. He was stunned by the beautiful rust color of what seemed to be living cells. The cell diameters averaged 10 microns, a little bigger than a human blood cell, which is about 7 microns. Dr. Lewis reported as many as 15 daughter cells budded within one mother cell and then broke out of the adult cell. That was clearly a process of replication. In normal Earth biology, replication requires the presence of DNA. But Dr. Lewis could not find evidence of DNA in the multiplying cells in his test tube. 8 months ago, in January of 2006, Dr. Lewis contacted astrobiologist Chandra Wickramasinghe, now at Cardiff University in Wales. Soon, Professor Wickramasinghe had some vials of the red rainwater to study and sent some to biologists at Sheffield University in England. America's Cornell University also received some red rain samples to analyze isotopic ratios. Elements confirmed so far are hydrogen, silicon, oxygen, carbon, and aluminum. But there still is no definitive confirmation of DNA or what makes the cell walls red. This month, on August 7th to 8th, I was in the microbiology lab at Cardiff University to see the red rainwater for myself and to talk with Professor Wickramasinghe and his graduate student, Nori Miyake. Nori has tried to break open the cells to amplify whatever DNA might be there. Nori showed me the pale pink rainwater in test tubes, and you can see photographs at my news website, www.earthfiles.com. At the top of the headlines page is a hot link to this red rain report with photographs and microscopic images. Nori told me he has never seen such thick, hard cell walls, which he could only partially penetrate. He is concerned about contamination in the fluorescent techniques that he tried, which indicate there might be DNA, but in his fluorescent research, there have been variables which might be false positives. He does not even know if he ever extracted anything from the red cells because the walls were so thick and hard to break. The Cardiff lab director, David Lloyd,
Anne's diary. Just take a look at it. You'll find it quite fascinating. I think I certainly did. It's the first time she's ever really talked about some of the things that actually happened to her during the time we were interacting with the Greys. Chapter 3 of the Greys should be available soon for you to download from the subscriber section. The first 3 chapters will be available and remain available in the subscriber section. I will not be reading past, however, chapter 3. Also, tomorrow, Saturday the 19th, from 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific Time, I will be in the chat room live in the subscriber section, so you're welcome to come visit with me there, and I'll be there from time to time from now on. We're not using our chat room enough, and I want to get back to it. It was a lot of fun, and it's something we should continue to do. Now let's rejoin Dreamland and Dr. Lowell's interview.
On the basis of the evidence that I've seen, I have to come on this side of an extraterrestrial origin for the red cells. I think the first injection of these cells in 2001 or even earlier than that most likely came from space.
And is it fair to say, if I summarize, that on the one hand, we have the sound of the boom that might relate to incoming chunk of ice that could have been carrying something that resembles yeast cells, but it came from outer space and replicated in the upper clouds, or it was a red yeast from our Earth that rose up in the air for some reason and replicated in the clouds. But those are the two, one terrestrial and one non-terrestrial?
I think those are the two contending theories, that the sonic boom that was heard was a...
Told me he thinks the rainwater cells might be some kind of Earth yeast cell, which also replicate by internal budding. And he postulates that maybe some kind of yeast rose up into the clouds over Kerala, multiplied into literally tons of cells, which then came down in the multiple rains. But Dr. Lloyd cannot explain why there would be red rain only in the summer of 2001, and none reported before or after until July 2006. There was another red rainfall in July this year over Kerala, almost exactly 5 years to the day of the first red rain. In June, when I interviewed Professor Wickramasinghe for Earth Files in Dreamland, he was reluctant to give up on the red rain cells having recognizable Earth DNA. But by August 8th, his mind was opening to the possibility that his and Fred Hoyle's panspermia theory might now have to accommodate other life in the universe that might not be exactly like Earth.
Subscribers, I have a few things to tell you. First, The Grays comes out on August the 22nd. Your book plate, if you were a subscriber, an active subscriber as of August the 15th, is in the mail and should be coming within the next couple of weeks. Ann and I are both going to be on George Noory on August the 24th. I think you'll find that fascinating. You'll also find Ann's diary, which is up right now in the regular part of the unknowncountry.com website.